Hi, I'm Darren Collins, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the road legal kit for the Tipo 184 and also how to pass your IVA test and get the vehicle registered for road use. The road going kit consists of headlights, mudguards, indicators, side repeaters, rear mudguards, rear lights, rear reflectors, number plate light, all of which make this kit road compliant. Really easy to fit, 3 bolts on the back for each mudguard, 2 bolts on the front, 1 bolt for the headlights. You can fit and remove all 4 parts of the road going kit within 30 minutes. The wiring is on a connection plug, so it's plug and play. It's really simple. Now you've got your Tipo road legal, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can use your car on the road. What you need to do next is have the car IVA'd, and that's an individual vehicle approval test. Now you can download the form online or you can apply online. The form you need is the IVA 1C form. Fill that in, send that back to the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, and you can choose a test centre, an IVA test centre local to you. There are about 20 throughout the UK, but please bear in mind that not all of those centres test kit cars, so check beforehand that the centre you use is able to test a kit car. Now, the other thing we recommend you do is download the IVA manual. You don't necessarily have to print it off. We use this quite regularly here at Dowsett's. It has all the information you need to pass the IVA test. Now, it's a real riveting read, I can assure you, but we've made it absolutely simple and easy for every Tipo builder, because the road legal kit that we supply to use the vehicle on the road is compliant with the IVA test. The only thing that isn't is some really quirky things. So the IVA is a little bit like the MOT from hell. They will go over the car with a fine-tooth comb and they're checking for lots of things which they just need to test to get you the vehicle approval. Those things don't matter from that point onwards. They just mean that you've complied with the IVA test itself. So what I'm going to show you in the video that you're about to see is all those little changes we need to make to the car to pass the IVA test. As you see the car now, it's quite happily be able to be used on the road. It is road legal, but it won't pass the IVA in its current form. So the modifications we're going to do next will allow the vehicle to pass the test, and then you can put it back to how it looks now to use it on the road. There are other things you can do with the car should you wish. If you want to remove the lights and the mudguards, you're quite able to do that once the car is registered and past the IVA, but it does limit you to daytime usage. So you can get something called a daytime running MOT on the car if you don't like the car with the lights and the mudguards, if you're looking for the full race look. Or alternatively, just keep them all on the car and you can use the car 24/7. There is one caveat though with removing the wings on the car. If you throw up any spray, so if it's raining, you've got to pull over. You're not allowed to use the car on a wet day, even if it's bright. So just bear those things in mind. Check the regulations, they do change annually, so when you download your IVA manual, make sure you've got the latest version of it, because they do, as I said earlier, change a couple of the little things in there and we don't want you to get caught out. But what I'm going to show you in the remainder of this video is what you need to do to get your car through the IVA test, and then you can apply for a registration document, get your new V5, put the registration plate on the car and use it quite legally on the road. For the purpose of the IVA, the first job we need to do is deal with the front grille. It's the iconic part of the Tipo 184, but unfortunately it won't meet the 2022 regulation for IVA because the corners are too sharp on the grille. They need to be greater than 2.5mm radius. Once we've passed the IVA, the grille can go back on. But to ensure your car passes the test, in our new IVA kit we are providing a front nose cover. The IVA is very strict when it comes to windscreens on the car. They need to meet quite a few criteria. Unfortunately, the Brooklyn screen that we have here, as period and as nice as it is, it doesn't meet the 2022 regulations. That's for a lot of reasons, namely the sharp corners, the exposed area of the glass, and also if you're taking a vehicle into IVA that has a windscreen, you also need to have blowers, ventilation, and at some point you're probably going to need wipers if the screen is over 6 inches high. So the simple solution here is to take the screen off, put those little bolts back in. If it's not there, they can't test it, so therefore you don't need your wipers, you don't need your blowers. For the purpose of the IVA, we cannot use a wheel nut with ears. The rules are quite strong on this. They're not allowed, so we're going to have to take them off. And swap them over for a hexagon wheel nut. Now, once these are tight, what I'm going to have to do is deal with the corner. The rules are quite precise on radiuses. We cannot have a corner sharper than 2.5mm, and unfortunately the hexagon on these nuts, even though they don't have ears on them, is too sharp for the IVA. So once I've tightened these nuts up, I'm going to put an extra wrap of the foam tape around the nut just to soften the corners and make sure that these comply with the rules for the IVA test. These nuts will be provided on a hire service from us just for your IVA test, or alternatively you can purchase them from us as well. The next thing to deal with for the IVA is the front suspension. Now there's a whole chapter in the IVA manual which covers the front suspension, the do's and don'ts, and it's quite complex, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify it for you so that it makes it nice and easy. So basically what they're looking for is sharp edges. So anything under that 2.5mm radius we need to protect. So that includes the edges of the upper and the lower wishbones. That can be protected quite easily with some rubber edge trim. Just offer that up, slip it on, use your snips, cut it to length, and that will deal with the upper and the lower wishbone edges. On the inside area of the wishbone, so if you imagine the lower wishbone as a triangle, the upper wishbone as a triangle, and you've got this imaginary triangular column between the upper and the lower wishbone. In this area in here, that's actually not assessed. So you're absolutely fine to have the corners of the shock absorber and everything else exposed in here because that part isn't tested. But anything outside of that triangular column formed by the wishbone does come under the IVA. So things like the brake backing disc plate here, that again you can put this edge trim on the edge of there. Other things are corners, so things like the track rod ends, the lock nuts, and the track rod end itself has got a corner on it. Now the radius on that will not pass the IVA, so for that we recommend getting some heat shrink, slipping it over the track rod and just heating that up so it softens those corners and it passes the IVA. Other strange things are like lock nuts. If you've got a split pin in a lock nut and it's outside of that area, you're going to fail because it's a sharp edge. So thing like the track rod end lock nut, make sure you put a nylock nut on there for the IVA. Even then, the corners of the lock nut will not pass the IVA. What you're going to need is a load of these little plastic nut covers, little dome covers that round off any corners that you get on a hexagonal nut. So simply slip those over the nuts and you'll pass the IVA. Hopefully that's made it nice and simple for you. I'm going to show you how to put all this stuff on. Just like the front suspension, we need to do a few things here on the rear to pass the IVA. So we need to protect the nuts and bolts going through the upper and the lower arms, the bottom of the shock absorber, the leading and the trailing edges of the lower arm, and the bracket that holds the handbrake cable. So to do that, we're going to put some foam tape around the bracket on the handbrake cable. We're going to make a nice little foam cover which goes around the bottom of the shock absorber. And we're also going to use some plastic nut covers to go on the various nuts and bolts of the suspension to round off any sharp edges. And finally, just like the front, we're going to use a bit of edge trim on the trailing edge and leading edge of the lower arm. One peculiarity in the IVA regulations is the visibility of a rear number plate. Now, what the rules state is that on a centre line from the rear of the car, 10 metres behind the car and 10 metres to either side, left or right, you've got to be able to see 100% of the number plate. Now, with a pointed tail on the Tipo, we can't see the number plate fully on that side of the vehicle from a direction over there. So in the IVA kit, you're going to find another number plate plinth. This is on with double-sided sticky tape. It's only fitted for the IVA test, and it means that we have two number plates on the car so it can be seen from both directions at the rear of the vehicle and pass the test. As with the front suspension arms, any sharp corners on the shock absorber top mounts, the headlight nut, the thread, the bracket, even the cable itself and the top of the shock absorber will fail the IVA. So to overcome that, we put a cover around them, and you get this in the IVA kit. This is designed specifically to use the same mounting holes as the body of the vehicle, so you don't have to drill any additional holes. Just like the front, for the rear we've made a set of covers which go over the suspension mount and the shock absorber using the original holes, so we don't need to drill anything in the body. One of the other items that will catch you out on the IVA is the sharp edges and the spring on the bonnet catch. So to overcome that, we get a little bit of foam water pipe insulation, pair of scissors, cut it into two sections. First section, feed that over the clasp, down and over the spring, over the boss that's on the car. Second section, measure the length you need, cut it, feed it over again. That covers that perfectly, just leaving the tip there. And what we recommend is a little bit of fuel hose, 8mm, just to put over the end there. So that'll pass the IVA now because it's taken away the sharp edges, and you can still open and close the bonnet. The next thing we need to consider for the IVA is the exhaust system. Now this needs to pass a couple of criteria, one of which is noise. That's 99 decibels at 3/4 maximum RPM of the engine, and that's at a very close proximity, but you don't need to worry about that with Tipo 184. We've designed this exhaust with a silencer in it which meets the IVA. So the only thing you need to worry about when you go for your IVA test is any corner projections which are going to be below that 2.5 millimeters they're looking for. So the first of which is going to be the tip of the exhaust. So in the IVA kit we're providing a little finisher which has a radiused edge. This edge complies with the IVA. The next thing that you need to consider is the O2 sensor, the hexagon nut on the O2 sensor. We need to cover that to make sure that passes as well. And finally, on the edge of the heat shield, we need to put some protection, a little bit of rubber edging around there, temporarily just for the IVA, which takes away that radius so that it passes on the edge protection. And finally, we don't want to burn the IVA inspector, so we're going to include a little bit of insulation that we're going to put over the remaining exposed sections of the exhaust so that it covers it and makes it nice and safe for the IVA inspector. So I'm going to show you how to put all those pieces onto the exhaust now. When it comes to the interior of the car, there's a lot of rules in the IVA book. They're quite daunting, but if you break it all down, I'm going to show you how we get around them. One of the rules is anything from floor level 150 millimeters above has to have a minimum radius of 2.5 millimeters. So things like the steering wheel spokes, the switches, the bracketry, the corners of the gear change bearings, they're not going to pass IVA, so we need to make sure that we protect those and soften those edges so that we can get through. Anything below 150 millimeters down to the actual floor level, all corners have to be blunted. Now, we have the gearbox in here, so all the castings and the edges of the gearbox, we need to protect those to make sure that they're not a sharp edge for the purpose of the IVA, as we do with the handbrake bracket. The other thing with an IVA is they don't like wooden steering wheels, unfortunately. So keep your donor steering wheel from your Mazda and we can swap it on to the car just for the purpose of the test. And additionally, anything outside of the steering wheel needs to have that radius on too. Behind the wheel doesn't matter, but anything exposed has to have the radius. So things like the switches, need to be protected, and we'll show you how to do all of that. And finally, the edges of the dashboard have their own regulation too, with the size and shape of the radius. But what I'm going to do next is show you how to make your Tipo interior pass the IVA. For the switch and the battery isolator, we're going to use the foam tape. The gear change linkage bearings we simply cover with the self-adhesive foam tape as used previously. For For the purpose of the IVA, the clutch pedal bracket doesn't meet the rules with the sharp metal edge, and the square switch here, we've put another piece of that pipe insulation around it because of the sharp corner. So we're just using some more rubber edging around that pedal assembly there, like so. We don't need it on the right because the knee is protected by the gear change linkage. And the edge of the foot plate needs a little rubber trim. To deal with the corners on the gearbox, we're producing a gearbox cover in the IVA kit. The gear change linkage is protected with a little bit of foam pipe insulation. Gear stick is protected with a little bit of 15mm foam pipe insulation. For the handbrake bracket, the edges are protected by simply fitting a leather gaiter. For the purpose of the IVA test, the lower edge of the dashboard has to have a radius of 19mm. So to achieve that, we put some rubber edge strip along the bottom of the dashboard. With all the items fitted for the IVA in the cockpit, we can now put back on the donor steering wheel. To finish off the steering wheel, we need to fit the centre. Because we're using the donor, this is an airbag. And because it's an airbag, it says airbag on the actual centre here. For the purpose of the IVA, because it says airbag, it needs to function. Now, we don't want to go down that route of putting all the sensors back into the car, so we simply trim over this so that it doesn't read airbag. With everything now fitted to the Tipo for the IVA test, we've got two options of how we get the vehicle to the test centre. We can drive the car with insurance, or we can stick it on the trailer. I'm going to drive it. The Road Legal Kit, which consists of the mudguards and the lights, are available to purchase on our website, tipo184.com. The IVA kit, which is all the parts you need to pass the test, are available for hire, just for the one day, or equally, you could purchase them from us if you so wish.